The stranger fell to his knees in the snow, clutching two bundles against his chest. His lips were blue, his hands were shaking, and when he looked up at Clara May Thornton with those broken eyes, he whispered the words that would change her life forever. "Please, ma'am, my boys are dying. Just one night in your barn, that's all I'm asking. One night." Clara's fingers stayed on the trigger, but something in those eyes made her hesitate. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the end. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story has traveled. The knock came at midnight. 3 desperate pounds that shook Clara May Thornton's front door like a death sentence. She froze by the wood stove coffee cup halfway to her lips. Nobody came to Thornton Ranch after dark. Not in November. Not with a blizzard howling across the Wyoming plains like a wounded animal. She set the cup down slow. The knock came again. Harder this time. Clara grabbed the shotgun from behind the coat rack. Her father had taught her to shoot before she could read. Her mother had taught her to pray. Tonight she reckoned she might need both. "Who's there?" she called out, voice steady as stone. Silence. Then a man's voice, ragged and raw. "Ma'am, I don't mean no harm. Please, my boys are dying out here." Boys. Clara's heart stuttered. She crossed to the window, pulling back the frost-covered curtain just enough to see. The lamp on the porch threw a weak circle of light into the swirling white. And there, at the edge of that light, stood a figure. Tall, hunched against the wind, holding something against his chest. No, not something. 2 somethings. Wrapped in blankets so thin she could see them flapping in the gale. Clara pulled open the door barrel first. The cold hit her like a fist. She squinted through the snow, and the figure stepped forward into the light. A man. Maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell with all that frost in his beard and shadows under his eyes deep enough to bury secrets in. But it was the bundles in his arms that stopped her breath. Babies. 2 of them. So small, so still, she thought for one terrible moment they were already dead. Then one of them whimpered, a tiny sound swallowed by the wind, but Clara heard it. Lord help her, she heard it. "Please," the man said again. His voice cracked on the word. "I've been walking since dawn. Thought I could make it to town, but the storm came up fast. I ain't asking for charity, ma'am. Just a place to lay them down. Somewhere out of the wind. Your barn a shed anywhere. I'll be gone by first light. I swear it." Clara studied him hard. Mud-caked boots, worn satchel over one shoulder. No horse, no wagon, nothing but the clothes on his back, and 2 babies that looked half frozen. "What's your name?" "Josiah Beckett, ma'am. These are my sons. Samuel and Elijah. They're 7 months old." He paused, jaw working. "Their mama passed 3 months back. It's just us now." Something twisted in Clara's chest. She knew about losing people. She knew about being left behind. She also knew about strangers. About the things that could happen to a woman alone on 120 acres with nobody to hear her scream. "The barn's out back," she said finally. "There's dry straw and some wool blankets in the corner. You'll find a lantern hanging by the door." Relief flooded his face. His shoulders dropped like someone had cut the strings holding him up. "Thank you, ma'am. God bless you. We'll be gone before—" "I didn't say you could thank me yet." Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I don't let strangers in my house. You stay in the barn, you stay quiet, and you don't come near the main building until I say so. We clear?" "Yes, ma'am. Crystal clear." He turned and walked into the white, the babies pressed tight against his chest. Clara watched until the snow swallowed him whole. Then she closed the door, leaned against it, and tried to remember how to breathe. Sleep wouldn't come. Clara lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind tear at the roof. The fire in the main room had burned down to embers, casting dancing shadows across the walls. She kept thinking about those babies. 7 months old. Born under the last cold moon, he'd said. Their mother dead and buried somewhere back east, and their father carrying them across Wyoming in November like he had no other choice. Maybe he didn't. Clara threw off the quilts and sat up. The floorboards were cold under her bare feet. She grabbed her shawl and walked to the window. The barn stood at the edge of the darkness, barely visible through the driving snow. No light in the window. No sound but the storm. "They're fine," she told herself. "They've got blankets. They've got shelter. It ain't your problem. But those babies." "Damn it," she muttered. 5 minutes later, she was trudging through knee-deep snow with a lantern in one hand and a basket in the other. The basket held bread, dried beef, a jar of milk she'd been saving, and extra blankets. The shotgun stayed behind. If that man wanted to hurt her, he'd had his chance. She pushed open the barn door. The smell of hay and horse hit her first. Old, familiar scents. Safe scents. She lifted the lantern higher. There. In the far corner. Josiah sat with his back against a hay bale, both babies cradled in his arms. He wasn't asleep. He was rocking them slow and steady, humming something low and broken. A lullaby, maybe. Or a prayer. When the light hit him, he looked up. His eyes were wet. "Ma'am?" "You're bringing them inside," Clara said. It wasn't a request. "Ma'am, you said—" "I know what I said." She set the basket down and held out her arms. "Now give me those babies before I change my mind." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, carefully, he rose to his feet and placed Samuel in her arms. The baby was warm, alive. His tiny fingers curled around her thumb, and something cracked open in Clara's chest that she'd kept sealed shut for years. "The other one, too," she said, her voice thick. Josiah handed her Elijah. She cradled them both, one in each arm, and turned toward the door. "Come on," she said over her shoulder. "There's food in the basket, and for God's sake wipe your boots before you track mud into my kitchen." The fire roared back to life. Clara had stoked it high, throwing on extra logs until the flames licked at the chimney. The kitchen filled with warmth, chasing the cold from every corner. She laid the babies down on a thick quilt near the hearth, tucking extra blankets around them until only their tiny faces showed. Samuel had stopped whimpering. Elijah was already asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Josiah stood by the door like he was afraid to move. Like one wrong step might shatter whatever spell had brought him inside. "Sit down," Clara said, pointing to the chair by the table. "You look like you're about to fall over." "Yes, ma'am." He sat. Clara put the kettle on and started slicing bread. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. More like two strangers learning the shape of each other's presence. "How long since you ate?" she asked without turning around. "Day and a half. Maybe 2. Lost track." She set a plate in front of him. Bread, dried beef cheese she'd been saving for Sunday. He stared at it like it was made of gold. "Eat," she said. "Then we'll talk." He ate like a man who'd forgotten what food tasted like. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him waiting. When he finally pushed the empty plate away, he met her eyes for the first time. "You didn't have to do this, ma'am." "Clara." "Ma'am?" "My name's Clara. You're in my house eating my food, warming your boys by my fire. Least you can do is use my given name." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or gratitude too deep for words. "Clara," he said, testing it. "Thank you, Clara." She nodded once. "Now tell me true. Where you headed?" "West. Maybe Montana. Maybe Oregon. Anywhere that ain't back." "That ain't an answer. It's the only one I got." Clara studied him over the rim of her cup. He looked haunted. Not just tired, but hollowed out from the inside. Like something had reached into his chest and scooped out everything soft. "What are you running from, Josiah Beckett?" His jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" "It does if it's going to follow you to my doorstep." For a long moment, he didn't answer. The fire crackled, the wind howled. One of the babies sighed in his sleep. Then Josiah leaned back in his chair and let out a breath that seemed to carry the weight of the whole world. "There was a man," he said quietly, "back in Kansas, name of Silas Crawford, owned half the county, banks, land, cattle, you name it. The kind of man who thinks everything and everyone belongs to him." Clara waited. "He wanted Hannah. That was the boy's mother. She worked at a boarding house in town. Crawford came sniffing around making offers. She turned him down flat. Told him she didn't care how much money he had. She'd rather starve than let him touch her." Josiah's hands curled into fists on the table. "He didn't take that well. Started spreading rumors. Said she was a thief, a liar worse. Got her fired from the boarding house. Nobody would hire her after that. She came to me and I told her we'd leave, start over somewhere new. She was already carrying the boys by then." "What happened?" "We made it 6 months. Had a little cabin outside of town. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Then Crawford found out where we were." Josiah's voice went flat. "He showed up one night with 3 of his men. Said Hannah had stolen something from him. Said he was there to collect." Clara felt her stomach drop. "He put his hands on her," Josiah continued. "I told him to stop. He didn't, so I made him stop. You killed him." "I hit him. Once. He fell backward, cracked his head on a rock. Died 2 days later." Josiah met her eyes. "His brother's the sheriff. Wasn't no trial, just a warrant. Murder, they said. As if defending the woman I loved from a man who was hurting her was murder." Clara let the silence stretch. "So you ran," she said finally. "Hannah died giving birth. Midwife said she was too weak from the stress, too worn down from everything Crawford put her through. I buried her behind our cabin, and then I took my boys and started walking. Been walking ever since." "How long?" 3 months, give or take." Clara looked at the babies sleeping by the fire. 3 months old when their mother died, carried across state lines by a father with nothing but love and desperation keeping him upright. "Crawford's family," she said slowly. "They still looking for you." "Reckon so. Man like that don't let go easy." "And if they find you here?" Josiah stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's why I should leave. First light, like I said. You've done more than enough, and I won't bring trouble to your door. Sit down." "Ma'am?" "I said sit down, Josiah." He sat. Clara leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on his. "Let me tell you something about trouble. My father died 5 years ago when his horse threw him into a ravine. My mother followed him 2 years later, coughing blood until there wasn't any left. I've run this ranch alone ever since. 120 acres, 30 head of cattle, and every man in this territory telling me a woman's got no business holding a deed." She paused. "So don't talk to me about trouble. I know trouble. Trouble's an old friend." Josiah stared at her. "You got strong hands?" Clara asked. "Ma'am." "Hands. Are they strong? Can you fix a fence? Tend livestock? Chop wood without losing a finger?" "I can do all that and more." "Good." Clara stood and started gathering the dishes. "There's a bunkhouse out back. Roof leaks, floors warped, hasn't been used since my father passed. You fix it up, make it livable, and you can stay. Temporary. Until you figure out your next move." Josiah didn't move. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Clara stopped at the sink. She didn't turn around. "Because those babies deserve a warm place to sleep, and because everyone deserves a second chance." She paused. "Even men running from ghosts." She heard him rise from the chair, heard him cross to where the babies lay sleeping, heard him kneel down beside them, and for a moment the only sound was the fire and the wind and the soft breathing of 2 small boys who had no idea how close they'd come to dying tonight. "I won't let you regret this," Josiah said finally. "You will if you slack off," Clara replied. But there was no bite in it this time. She turned and found him looking up at her with something she couldn't quite name. Not gratitude exactly. Something deeper. something that scared her a little if she was honest. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow, there's work to do." The next morning broke cold and bright. Clara was up before dawn the way she'd been every day for 5 years. She fed the chickens, checked on the cattle, broke the ice on the water trough, and hauled wood to the main house. By the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge, she'd already done more work than most men did in a week. When she came back inside, Josiah was in the kitchen. He'd found the coffee, made it strong the way she liked it. The babies were awake, propped up in a makeshift nest of blankets, watching the fire with wide, curious eyes. "Morning," he said. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." He handed her a cup. "Figured I'd make myself useful." Clara took a sip. Not bad. Better than her own, if she was being honest. "Bunkhouse needs clearing," she said. "Tools are in the shed. Nails, hammer, tar for the roof. I want it weather-tight by the end of the week." "Yes, ma'am." "Clara." He almost smiled. "Yes, Clara." She watched him go, the babies bundled against his chest in a sling he'd fashioned from an old blanket. He walked with his back straight now, shoulders square, like something in him had shifted overnight. Clara turned back to her coffee and tried not to think about what that meant. But she was still standing at the window when Dorothea Kessler's horse came trotting up the road. Dot Kessler had taught every child in Bitter Creek for 30 years. She'd also buried 2 husbands, survived a Sioux raid, and once shot a mountain lion that wandered into her schoolhouse. At 62, she had a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. "Morning, Clara," she said, dismounting in one smooth motion. "Word travels fast around here, you know that." Clara felt her jaw tighten. Already. "Old Henry Crew saw a man walking toward your place yesterday, told his wife. His wife told Mary Sullivan at the general store. Mary told everyone else." Dot climbed the porch steps and looked Clara dead in the eye. "They're saying you've taken in a drifter. A man with babies. No wife." "They're saying right." Dot raised an eyebrow. And nothing. He needed help. I gave it. End of story." "Is it?" Clara crossed her arms. "What are you really here for, Dot?" The older woman sighed and pulled off her riding gloves. "I'm here because your cousin Marcus was in town this morning, asking questions about the ranch, about you, about whether you're still meeting the terms of your father's deed." Clara's blood ran cold. "What terms?" "Don't play ignorant with me, girl. We both know about the clause. Your grandfather wrote it in before he died. Said if you weren't married within a reasonable time, stewardship of the land would transfer to the nearest male relative. That clause is garbage. My father never enforced it." "Your father's dead." Dot's voice softened. "And Marcus isn't. He's been waiting for an excuse, Clara. Now you've given him one." Clara turned and stared out at the bunkhouse where Josiah was already hammering away at the roof. "Let him come," she said quietly. "Clara, I said let him come." She turned back to Dot, and there was fire in her eyes. "This is my land, my home. My father built it with his bare hands, and I've bled for every acre. If Marcus thinks he can take it because I helped a man and his babies survive a blizzard, he can damn well try." Dot studied her for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. "Good," she said. "I was hoping you'd say that." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped bundle. "Fresh bread, and some jerky for your guest." She pressed it into Clara's hands. "You're going to need allies, Clara. I know people in this town. Good people. When the time comes, they'll stand with you." "And the others." Dot's smile faded. "The others will talk. They always do. But talk can't take your land. Only the law can do that." She mounted her horse and gathered the reins. "One more thing," she said, looking down at Clara. "That man out there, Josiah, is he worth the trouble?" Clara glanced toward the bunkhouse again. She could hear him now singing softly to the babies while he worked. Something old and sad and beautiful. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I aim to find out. Dot nodded once and rode off without another word. Clara stood on the porch for a long time, watching the dust settle behind her. Then she squared her shoulders, picked up her shotgun, and walked toward the bunkhouse. There was work to do, and somewhere out there, Marcus Thornton was sharpening his knives. Let him come, she thought. Let them all come. 3 days passed. Josiah worked from dawn until his hands bled, then wrapped them in rags and kept working. He patched the bunkhouse roof. He replaced the rotted floorboards. He hung new hinges on the door and stuffed rags into every crack where the wind crept through. Clara watched him from a distance, pretending not to. On the 4th morning, she found him in the barn before sunrise, mucking out stalls that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Samuel and Elijah sat bundled in a wooden crate lined with hay, watching their father with those wide, trusting eyes. "You don't have to do that," Clara said from the doorway. Josiah didn't stop. "Horses deserve clean stalls." "Those horses have been living in worse for 2 years. They ain't complaining." Maybe they were just waiting for someone to notice. Clara felt the corner of her mouth twitch. She fought it down. "Coffee's ready," she said. "Breakfast too. Don't let it get cold." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Clara." She looked back. Josiah leaned on the pitchfork, sweat already beading on his forehead, despite the cold. "Thank you. For letting us stay. For everything." "You already thanked me." "Feels like it ain't enough." Clara studied him for a moment. The way he stood. The way he held himself like a man learning to take up space again after spending too long trying to disappear. "Then make it enough," she said quietly. "Show me I wasn't wrong about you." She walked back to the house without waiting for his reply, but she heard him pick up the pitchfork again before she'd gone 10 steps. They fell into a rhythm. Mornings, Clara handled the livestock while Josiah chopped wood and hauled water. Afternoons, they worked the fence lines together side by side, speaking only when necessary. Evenings, they sat in Clara's kitchen while the babies slept, eating whatever she'd managed to cook, the silence between them growing more comfortable with each passing day. It wasn't friendship. Not exactly. More like two people recognizing something familiar in each other. Something broken. Something stubborn enough to keep going anyway. On the 5th night, Clara asked the question she'd been holding back. Their mother, Hannah. What was she like? Josiah's hands stilled around his coffee cup. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "She laughed easy. That was the first thing I noticed about her. Like the world hadn't worn her down yet, even though it had every reason to." "How'd you meet?" "Boarding house in Lawrence. I was passing through looking for work. She brought me coffee and asked where I was headed. I said I didn't know. She said maybe I should stop running long enough to figure it out." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. Smart woman. Smartest I ever knew. Josiah looked down at his cup. She deserved better than what she got. Better than Crawford. Better than running, better than dying alone in a cabin, while I rode for help that came too late. You blame yourself. Every single day. Clara reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the calluses on his palm, the warmth beneath the roughness. "The ones we lose," she said softly. "They don't want us to carry that weight forever. Trust me, I know." Josiah looked up at her. His eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. "How do you know?" "Because I've been carrying my own weight for 5 years, and I'm tired, Josiah. Bone tired." She pulled her hand back. "But I keep going. Because that's what they would have wanted. And because stopping means letting the darkness win." He nodded slowly. "You're stronger than you know, Clara. So are you." Neither of them spoke for a while after that, but when Josiah finally rose to check on the babies, he paused at the door. "Clara." "Yeah." I'm glad I knocked on your door that night." She didn't answer. But long after he'd gone, she sat alone by the fire, wondering why those simple words had made her heart beat faster than it had in years. The trouble came on the 7th day. Clara was in the chicken coop when she heard hooves, multiple horses moving fast. She grabbed the shotgun she kept leaning against the wall and stepped outside. 3 riders, 2 she didn't recognize. The third she knew too well. Marcus Thornton sat tall in his saddle, wearing a coat too fine for Wyoming weather, and a smile that made Clara's skin crawl. Behind him rode his father's old foreman, a thick-necked man named Gus Wheeler, and a younger man with a badge pinned to his chest. Deputy. From town. Clara planted her feet and waited. Marcus dismounted, first brushing dust from his sleeves, like he'd just stepped out of a parlor instead of riding 20 miles through frozen mud. "Cousin Clara," he said, spreading his arms wide. "It's been too long." "Not long enough. What do you want, Marcus?" "Straight to business. I always admired that about you." He stepped closer, and Clara raised the shotgun an inch. He stopped, still smiling. Now, no need for that. We're family." "We share blood. That ain't the same thing." Marcus's smile flickered. "I've come about the ranch, Clara. About your situation." "I don't have a situation." "That's not what I hear." He glanced toward the bunkhouse where Josiah had appeared in the doorway, the babies held tight against his chest. "Word is, you've taken in a stranger. A man. Living on your property, working your land, sleeping under your roof. He sleeps in the bunkhouse, and what I do on my property ain't your concern." "But it is." Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "Grandfather's deed. You remember the clause, don't you? If the female inheritor fails to marry within a reasonable period, stewardship transfers to the nearest male relative." He paused. "That's me, Clara." Clara's grip tightened on the shotgun. That clause was never enforced. My father ignored it. The county ignored it. It's meaningless. Was meaningless. Times change. Marcus gestured to the deputy. "This is Harold Finch, deputy from Bitter Creek. He's here to witness my formal petition for transfer of stewardship." The deputy stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Thornton, I'm just here to observe. Mr. Thornton has filed papers with the county assessor. There'll be a hearing next month." "A hearing?" "Yes, ma'am. To determine whether the clause applies." Clara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd known this day might come. She just hadn't expected it so soon. "Get off my land," she said quietly. Marcus laughed. "Your land, Clara. We both know you can't hold this place alone. You never could. A woman needs a man to—" "I said get off my land." The laughter died. Marcus's face hardened into something ugly. "You're making a mistake, cousin. I'm offering you a way out. Sign over partial stewardship, let me handle the business side, and you can stay here. Keep your house. Keep your chickens." He glanced at Josiah again. "Keep your pet drifter for all I care." "No. No. You heard me." Clara stepped forward, shotgun leveled at Marcus's chest. "My father built this ranch with nothing but his hands and his will. My mother died here. I buried them both on that hill behind the barn, and I swore on their graves that I'd hold this land until my last breath." She was close enough now to see the fear flicker in Marcus's eyes. "So here's what's going to happen," she continued. "You're going to get back on your horse. You're going to ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of. And if you ever set foot on Thornton land again without my permission, I'll put a hole in you big enough to see daylight through." Marcus's jaw clenched. "You'll regret this." "I've regretted a lot of things in my life. This ain't gonna be one of them." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Marcus turned sharply and mounted his horse. "1 month, Clara," he called back. "You've got 1 month before the hearing. Enjoy your time." He rode off without looking back. Gus followed, but the deputy lingered. "Miss Thornton," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, I think what he's doing is wrong. But the law's the law. You'll need proof that this land is productive. Records, witnesses, something to show the judge you've met the terms. Clara lowered the shotgun. Why are you telling me this? Because my mother was a woman alone once, and she got no help from anyone. He tipped his hat. Good luck, ma'am. He rode off, and Clara stood in the yard until the dust settled and the silence returned. Then Josiah was beside her. I heard everything, he said. I figured. Clara, if my being here is making things worse, it's not. But if they're using me as an excuse, they'd find another one. She turned to face him. Men like Marcus don't need reasons. They need opportunities. If it wasn't you, it'd be something else. A bad harvest. A sick cow. Anything to prove I can't handle this place alone. Josiah's jaw tightened. You're not alone. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them was ready to name. I know, Clara said finally. That's what scares them. Joe. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the moon rise over the frozen fields. Her father's deed lay open on the table behind her, the hateful clause circled in ink. She'd read it a dozen times. Every time she hoped the words would change. Every time they didn't. A soft knock at the door. It's me, Josiah said from the other side. Clara hesitated, then opened it. He stood there in the cold, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, concern written across his face. Saw your light on, he said. Figured you might need company. She should have sent him away. Should have reminded him about boundaries, about propriety, about all the things people would say if they knew. Instead, she stepped aside and let him in. They sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp burning between them. For a while, neither spoke. What are you going to do? Josiah finally asked. Fight. How? Clara rubbed her eyes. Dot says I need proof. Records of production. Witnesses who can testify the ranch is thriving. She laughed bitterly. Thriving. 2 years of barely scraping by, and I need to prove I'm thriving. The cattle are healthy. Barely. The fences are mended. Thanks to you. The bunkhouse is fixed. The barn's clean. The chickens are laying. Josiah leaned forward. Clara, you've done more in the last week than most ranches do in a month. That means something. She looked at him. It won't be enough. Not for a judge. Not with Marcus's money greasing the wheels. Then we make it enough. How? Josiah's eyes held hers. Steady. Certain. We work harder. We document everything. Every egg, every calf, every fence post. We find witnesses who'll speak for you. People who've seen what you've built here. He paused. And if that's not enough, we find another way. What other way? He didn't answer immediately. The fire crackled. The wind moaned outside, and Clara understood what he wasn't saying. No, she said sharply. Clara, I'm not marrying you to save my ranch. I didn't say you were thinking it. She stood and walked to the window, her back to him. Everyone's always thinking it. That's the only solution they can see. Woman in trouble. Find her a husband. Problem solved. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Silence. When she turned around, Josiah was on his feet, his face torn between frustration and something softer. I meant that you've given me more in 1 week than anyone's given me in years, he said quietly. A roof. A chance. A reason to believe tomorrow might be better than yesterday. If there's a way I can repay that any way at all, I'll do it. Marriage or otherwise. Clara felt the anger drain out of her. In its place came something more complicated. Something that made her chest ache. I don't want gratitude, she said. I want a partner. Someone who stays because they choose to, not because they owe me. Josiah stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his eyes. What if I want to choose? He asked. What if being here with you is the first choice I've made in months that actually felt right? Clara's breath caught. Josiah. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I'm just saying, maybe this doesn't have to be about saving your ranch. Maybe it can be about something more. She stared at him. This man she barely knew. This stranger who'd stumbled onto her porch a week ago with 2 dying babies and nothing but desperation in his eyes. She should have said no, should have pushed him away, built walls, protected herself the way she'd been protecting herself for years. Instead, she said, "Stay." What? Stay. Here. Tonight. She swallowed hard. Not like that, just stay. I don't want to be alone right now. Josiah nodded slowly. Okay. They sat back down at the table, the lamp burning low between them, and somewhere in the small hours of the morning, Clara's head dipped forward and she slept. When she woke at dawn, Josiah was gone, but there was fresh coffee on the stove, a fire blazing in the hearth, and a note on the table in handwriting she didn't recognize. Started on the east fence, back by noon, J. Clara read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket where she could feel it against her heart. The next week was a blur of work. Josiah threw himself into the ranch like a man possessed. He mended fences, repaired tools, reorganized the barn, and somehow found time to care for the twins between tasks. Clara worked alongside him, matching his pace, refusing to fall behind. They barely spoke during the day. They didn't need to. There was a rhythm between them now, an understanding that went deeper than words. But in the evenings after the babies were asleep, they sat together by the fire and talked. About their pasts, about their fears, about the people they'd lost and the dreams they'd abandoned. Clara told him about William, the boy she'd almost married before the fever took him. She told him about her father's calloused hands and her mother's quiet strength. She told him about the nights she'd spent alone in this house, wondering if she was foolish to keep fighting. Josiah told her about Hannah, about the way she'd made him feel like he could be more than just a drifter, about the guilt that still woke him in the middle of the night, whispering that he could have done more, should have been faster, might have saved her. If only— Stop, Clara said one night, reaching across to take his hand. You can't change what happened. All you can do is honor her memory by being the father she'd want you to be. Josiah's fingers tightened around hers. Is that what you do, honor their memory? Every day, every fence post, every sunrise, every breath I take on this land. That's my honor. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Just once. Just lightly. Thank you, he whispered. Clara's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't pull away. On the 14th day, Dot Kessler returned with news. Marcus has been busy, she said, sitting at Clara's kitchen table, with a cup of coffee she'd barely touched. He's been talking to everyone in town, spreading stories. What kind of stories? The kind that make you look bad and him look reasonable. Dot's mouth pressed into a thin line. Says you've taken up with a vagrant. A criminal, he's calling him. Says the man showed up with 2 babies and no wife, no papers, no proof of who he is or where he came from. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Josiah's not a criminal. I know that. You know that. But half the town doesn't know anything except what Marcus tells them. Dot leaned forward. He's building a case, Clara, not just for the land. He wants to destroy your reputation so completely that even if you win the hearing, you'll have nothing left. Clara's hands clenched into fists. What do I do? You fight back. Get ahead of the story. Dot glanced towards the window where Josiah was visible in the distance, working the fence line. That man out there. Does he have any proof of who he is, where he came from? Anything at all? He had a wife. She died. He's been running ever since. Running from what? Clara hesitated. She'd kept Josiah's secret because it wasn't hers to tell. But now, with everything at stake— There was a man in Kansas, she said slowly. A powerful man. He hurt Hannah, and Josiah defended her. The man died. His family wants revenge. Dot's face went pale. Good Lord. He's not a murderer. He was protecting the woman he loved. I believe you. But Clara... Dot shook her head. If that story gets out, Marcus will use it. He'll twist it into something ugly, and no one will care about the truth. Clara stood and walked to the window. Josiah had stopped working. He was looking back toward the house as if he sensed something was wrong. Then we need to get ahead of it, she said. Find out if there's still a warrant. Find out what we're up against. And if there is... Clara turned back to Dot, her jaw set. Then we deal with it. Together. That evening, Clara told Josiah everything. He listened in silence, his face growing harder with every word. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. I should leave, he said quietly. No. Clara, if they find out about Kansas, then they find out. She crossed to him and put her hand on his arm. I didn't let you stay so you could run at the first sign of trouble. This isn't trouble. This is destruction. Everything you've built, everything you're fighting for, means nothing if I build it on cowardice. She turned him to face her. Josiah, look at me. Look at me. He did. His eyes were haunted, desperate, afraid. I've been alone for 5 years, Clara said. 5 years of fighting by myself, believing by myself, bleeding by myself. And in 2 weeks, you've made me remember what it feels like to have someone standing beside me. Clara, I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm asking you to stay now, to fight with me, to see this through. She swallowed hard. Can you do that? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then slowly he nodded. I can do that. Good. She stepped back, her heart pounding. Because tomorrow we're going to town, and we're going to find out exactly what we're facing. Josiah's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Together, he asked. Clara met his eyes and held them. Together. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, carrying the first snowflakes of another Wyoming storm. But inside by the fire, 2 broken people made a silent vow. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The ride into Bitter Creek took 2 hours. Clara sat rigid in the wagon seat, the reins tight in her gloved hands. Beside her, Josiah held the twins against his chest, both boys bundled so thick they looked like cotton balls with faces. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the creak of wheels and the soft crunch of snow beneath the horses' hooves. Clara's mind raced the whole way. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's smug face, heard his threats echoing in the dark. 1 month. That's all she had. 1 month to prove she deserved to keep the land her father had died for. You're thinking too loud, Josiah said quietly. How can you tell? Your jaw's been clenched since we left the ranch. Keep that up, you'll crack a tooth. Despite everything, Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. Worried about my teeth now. Worried about you. She glanced at him. His face was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept scanning the road ahead, like he expected trouble around every bend. We'll be fine, she said. She wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. Bitter Creek appeared on the horizon like a mirage. A cluster of wooden buildings huddled together against the cold smoke rising from chimneys. Horses tied outside the saloon. It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to civilization for 50 miles. Clara pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store and climbed down. Her boots hit the frozen mud with a thud that felt louder than it should have. Stay here, she told Josiah. I'll find Dot. See what she's learned. Clara, I need you to watch the boys, please. He hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. She walked away before he could see the fear in her eyes. The town felt different today, quieter. People she'd known for years turned away when she passed. Old Mrs. Harmon, who used to bring pies to her mother's Sunday dinners, crossed to the other side of the street. Tom Briggs, who'd helped her father build the barn, suddenly found his boots very interesting. Clara kept her head high and her pace steady. Let them stare. Let them whisper. She'd survived worse than gossip. Dot's schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a small white building with a crooked weather vane on top. Clara found the older woman inside, sweeping floors that were already clean. "You came," Dot said, setting the broom aside. "Good. We don't have much time." "What did you find out?" Dot's face was grim. "Sit down, Clara." "I'd rather stand." "Sit down." Clara sat. Dot pulled a chair close and leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I sent a telegram to a friend in Kansas, a lawyer I knew from years back. Asked him to check the records in Lawrence County." She paused. "There's a warrant, Clara, for Josiah Beckett. Murder in the 2nd degree." Clara felt the room tilt. Murder. That's what the paper says. Silas Crawford deceased. Josiah's named as the primary suspect. The sheriff back there has had men looking for him for 3 months. But he was defending Hannah. Crawford attacked her first. I know, but Crawford's brother wrote the warrant, and in that county, his word is law. Dot reached out and took Clara's hands. "There's more." "More?" "Someone's already here. A man came into town yesterday, well-dressed, city boots, asking questions about strangers in the area." Clara's blood went cold. "Who is he?" "Said his name was Victor Haywood, private detective out of St. Louis, hired by the Crawford family to find Josiah and bring him back." Clara stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "Where is he now?" "The saloon. Been there all morning buying drinks and loosening tongues." Dot stood too. "Clara, listen to me. If this man finds Josiah, he won't. He will. It's only a matter of time. Someone will talk. Someone always does." Clara's mind was spinning. She thought of Josiah sitting in the wagon holding his sons, trusting her to find a way forward. She thought of the ranch of Marcus, of everything she stood to lose. "There has to be another way," she said. "Some kind of appeal, a new trial, something." "There might be. My friend says the original warrant was questionable. No witnesses called, no evidence presented. Just Crawford's brother pointing a finger and calling it justice." Dot's eyes met hers. If Josiah could get a fair hearing, a real one, he might have a chance. "How do we make that happen?" "Federal marshal. There's one passing through Sheridan next week. If we can get to him, present the case, maybe next week." Clara shook her head. "The hearing for my ranch is in 3 weeks. If that detective finds Josiah before then, everything falls apart. Then we need to be smart. Keep Josiah out of sight, keep our heads down, and pray that detective gets bored and moves on." Clara wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe they could hide, wait it out, survive. But she'd lived long enough to know that problems didn't go away just because you ignored them. They grew teeth and came back hungry. "I need to warn him," Clara said, moving toward the door. "Clara, wait." But she was already gone. She walked fast, too fast, her boots slipping on the icy street. She rounded the corner toward the general store and stopped dead. The wagon was empty. Clara's heart seized. She spun around, searching the street, the storefronts, the alleys. "Josiah!" No answer. She ran to the saloon, pushed through the swinging doors, and found herself face to face with hell. Josiah stood in the center of the room, the twins clutched tight against his chest. Around him, a half-circle of men had formed, cutting off every exit. And at the front of that circle, leaning against the bar, with a drink in his hand, was a man Clara had never seen before. He was younger than she'd expected. 35 maybe, clean-shaven with sharp features and eyes that held no warmth at all. He wore a black coat that probably cost more than Clara made in a year, and when he smiled, his teeth gleamed like a predator's. "Miss Thornton, I presume?" he said, raising his glass. "Victor Haywood. I've heard so much about you." Clara stepped forward, putting herself between Haywood and Josiah. "Let him go." "I'm afraid I can't do that." Haywood set his glass down and straightened. "Mr. Beckett here is wanted for murder in the state of Kansas. I've been hired to bring him back." "He's not a murderer. The warrant says otherwise." "The warrant is a lie." Clara's voice rang through the silent room. Silas Crawford attacked a defenseless woman. Josiah stopped him. "That's not murder. That's justice." Haywood's smile didn't waver. "That's a lovely story, Miss Thornton. But stories don't hold up in court. Evidence does. Witnesses do. And Mr. Crawford's family has plenty of both. Paid witnesses, bought evidence. Everyone knows the Crawfords own that county. Everyone knows a lot of things." Haywood stepped closer. "What I know is this: I have a legal warrant and the authority to execute it. Now we can do this quietly, or we can do it loud. Your choice." Clara felt Josiah's hand on her shoulder. She turned to find him looking at her with those dark, steady eyes. "Clara," he said softly, "it's over." "No. I won't let them hurt you because of me. I won't let them take your ranch. They're not taking anything." She turned back to Haywood, her chin raised. "You want him? You'll have to go through me." The saloon went dead silent. Haywood studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "I admire your spirit, Miss Thornton. I really do. But this isn't a negotiation." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "This is a warrant signed by a sitting judge. Legally binding, enforceable. I could take Mr. Beckett right now, and there's nothing you could do to stop me." "Then why haven't you—" Haywood paused. "Excuse me. If you have all this authority, all this power, why are you standing here talking instead of dragging him out in chains?" Clara stepped forward, her voice dropping. "Because you know something's wrong. You know that warrant is dirty, and you know that if you take him back to Kansas, he won't get a fair trial. He'll get a noose." Haywood's smile flickered, just for a second, but Clara saw it. "What do you want, Miss Thornton?" "Time." "Time for what?" "Time to prove his innocence. There's a federal marshal coming through Sheridan next week. Real law. Not bought and paid for by some rich man's family." Clara held Haywood's gaze. "Give us until then. Let him make his case. And if the marshal says he should go back to Kansas, I won't stand in your way." Haywood was quiet for a long moment. The men around him shifted, uncertain. "And if I say no?" "Then you'll have to take him by force, in front of all these witnesses." Clara gestured at the crowded saloon. "And I promise you, Mr. Haywood, that's a story that will follow you for the rest of your career." The silence stretched. Clara could hear her own heartbeat loud as thunder. Then Haywood laughed again. This time there was something almost like respect in it. "1 week," he said. "You have 1 week. But know this, Miss Thornton, if that marshal doesn't clear him, I'm taking him back. And I won't be nearly as polite about it." He turned and walked out of the saloon, his men trailing behind. Clara didn't move until the doors stopped swinging. Then her knees buckled and Josiah's arm was around her, holding her up. "You're crazy," he whispered. "You know that?" "Probably. You just bought me a week, against a man like that." "I bought us a week." She straightened, forcing strength into her legs. "Now let's not waste it." They walked out of the saloon together, the twins still clutched against Josiah's chest. Behind them, the whispers started. But Clara didn't hear them. She was already planning their next move. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than before. Clara gripped the reins until her knuckles went white, her mind churning through possibilities, strategies, prayers. "Thank you," Josiah said quietly, "for what you did back there." "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this." "I know, but you stood up for me. In front of the whole town. Nobody's ever done that before. Clara glanced at him. In the fading light, his face looked older, more worn, but his eyes were clear. People should have, she said. A long time ago. Maybe, but they didn't. He shifted the sleeping twins in his arms. Clara, I need you to know something. What? Whatever happens next, I don't regret it. Any of it. Coming here, staying, meeting you. He paused. If they take me back to Kansas, if I don't make it through this. Stop. Clara. I said stop. She pulled the wagon to a halt and turned to face him fully. You're not going back to Kansas. You're not dying. And you're not giving up. Not while I'm still breathing. How can you be so sure? Because I've lost too many people already. My father, my mother, everyone I've ever loved. Her voice cracked. I'm not losing you too. Josiah stared at her. Something shifted in his expression, something raw and vulnerable and utterly unguarded. Clara. We fight, she said fiercely. Together. Until there's nothing left to fight for. That's what we do. That's who we are. He reached out and cupped her face in his rough, calloused hand. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then he kissed her. It was gentle, almost hesitant, like he was asking permission, even as his lips met hers. Clara froze for half a second, then melted into him, her hands fisting in his coat, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were trembling. I've wanted to do that since the first night, he whispered. Why didn't you? Because I didn't think I deserved it. Didn't think I deserved you. Clara pressed her forehead to his. Stop deciding what you deserve. Let me decide. And what have you decided? She pulled back and looked into his eyes. That you're worth fighting for. All of you. They sat there in the gathering dark, the cold forgotten, the world narrowed down to just the two of them, and the sleeping babies between them. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new threats, new fears. But tonight, for the first time in years, Clara didn't feel alone. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Clara and Josiah worked from before dawn until well after dark. They documented everything, the cattle counts, the chicken yields the fence, repairs the stored grain. Dot came by with ledgers and helped organize it all into something that might convince a judge. This is good, she said, flipping through the pages. Real good. Shows the ranch is productive, self-sustaining. Might be enough to counter Marcus's claims. Might? Clara asked. Law's never a sure thing, child, especially when money's involved. Dot looked up. But we've got a fighting chance. That's more than most. Josiah spent his nights writing letters. To the marshal in Sheridan. To a lawyer Dot knew in Cheyenne. To anyone who might listen to his side of the story. I keep thinking about Hannah, he told Clara one evening. What she'd say if she could see all this. What do you think she'd say? He smiled soft and sad. She'd say, stop moping and get to work. That's what she always said when I got lost in my head. Smart woman. The smartest. Clara reached over and squeezed his hand. We're going to get through this. How do you know? Because we don't have a choice. On the 4th day, Marcus came back. Clara was in the chicken coop when she heard the horses. She grabbed her shotgun and stepped outside, her heart already sinking. 3 riders this time. Marcus in front, Gus Wheeler beside him, and a third man she didn't recognize. Older, silver-haired, eyes like chips of ice. Edmund Thornton, Marcus's father, Clara's own blood uncle. She hadn't seen him in 10 years. Not since her father's funeral, when he'd tried to buy the ranch for pennies on the dollar, and she'd told him exactly where he could shove his offer. He'd smiled then too, the same cold, calculating smile he wore now. Clara, Edmund said, not dismounting. You've grown. And you've gotten uglier. What do you want? Marcus's face flushed with anger, But Edmund just chuckled. Direct as ever. I admire that. He leaned forward in his saddle. I've come to make you an offer. One last chance before the hearing. I'm not interested. You haven't heard it yet. Don't need to. The answer's no. Edmund's smile faded. You're making a mistake, girl. I've got lawyers, connections, friends in the county assessor's office. I can make this hearing go very badly for you. Then make it go badly. I'm still not signing over my land. It's not just your land anymore, is it? Edmund glanced toward the bunkhouse where Josiah had appeared in the doorway. I hear you've got a house guest, a fugitive, if the rumors are true. Clara's grip tightened on the shotgun. My house guest is none of your business. He is when he's living on Thornton property. Property that should rightfully belong to the family. Edmund's voice hardened. I've been patient, Clara. More patient than your father ever was. But my patience has limits. So does mine? Clara raised the shotgun an inch. Get off my land. For a long moment, Edmund didn't move. His eyes bored into hers cold and pitiless. Then he smiled again. Have it your way. But remember, Clara, I offered you a way out. When everything falls apart, you'll have no one to blame but yourself. He turned his horse and rode off, Marcus and Gus following close behind. Clara watched them go, her hands shaking. Josiah came up beside her. Who was that? My uncle. Marcus's father. She lowered the shotgun. The real snake in the family. What did he want? Same thing they all want. My land, my home, my surrender. Josiah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, He's not going to stop, is he? No, none of them are. Clara turned to face him. But neither am I. That night, Clara sat by the fire staring at the flames. Josiah was asleep in the bunkhouse with the twins. Dot had gone home hours ago. The ranch was quiet, but Clara's mind wouldn't rest. She thought about her father, about the way he used to sit in this same chair, staring at this same fire, worrying about debts and droughts and all the things that could go wrong. You gotta hold on, Clara May, he'd told her once not long before he died. This land, it's more than dirt and grass. It's our legacy, our blood. Don't ever let anybody take that from you. I won't, Daddy, she'd promised. But she'd been 22 then, young, naive. She hadn't known how hard keeping that promise would be. A soft knock at the door. Clara's hand went to the shotgun before she caught herself. Who's there? It's me. Josiah's voice. She crossed to the door and opened it. He stood there in the moonlight, Samuel cradled in one arm, Elijah in the other. Both boys were awake, their eyes bright in the darkness. They wouldn't sleep, he said. Thought maybe... He trailed off. Clara stepped aside. Come in. They sat by the fire together, the babies between them. For a while, nobody spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of flames and the soft coos of two small boys discovering their own fingers. I've been thinking, Josiah finally said. About what? About what happens if we lose. The hearing, the warrant, all of it. Clara felt her throat tighten. We're not going to lose. But if we do... He looked at her, his eyes serious. I want you to know something, Clara. Whatever happens to me, I want those boys to stay with you. Josiah? Please, let me finish. He took a deep breath. I've got nothing to give them. No money, no land, no future. But you could give them everything I can't. A home, a family, a chance. Clara felt tears pricking at her eyes. You're their father. I know. And I love them more than anything in this world. But loving them means wanting what's best for them, even if that means... His voice broke. Even if that means letting go. Clara reached out and took his hand. You're not going anywhere, not if I have anything to say about it. You can't promise that. Watch me. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. And you're the most pig-headed man. Guess we're well matched." He laughed a real laugh this time, and something in Clara's chest eased. "We're gonna fight," she said firmly. "And we're gonna win. Both battles, the ranch and the warrant. And when it's all over, you're going to be standing right here holding those boys, watching them grow up on Thornton land." "You really believe that?" Clara squeezed his hand. "I have to, because the alternative isn't worth thinking about." They sat together until the fire burned low and the babies finally slept. And when Clara finally closed her eyes, she dreamed of spring of green fields and blue skies, and a future that might still be worth fighting for. The hearing was 1 week away. The marshal was due in 5 days. And somewhere out there, Victor Haywood was watching, waiting, counting down the hours until his patience ran out. But inside the Thornton ranch house by a dying fire, 2 broken people held on to each other and dared to hope. Doubt. The fire started at midnight. Clara woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, trapped in some nightmare where the walls closed in and the air turned to ash. Then she heard the screaming. Not human screaming. Horses. She threw off her blankets and ran to the window. The barn was burning. Flames climbed the walls like living things, orange and red and hungry, devouring everything in their path. "No!" Clara grabbed her coat and boots and flew out the door. The cold hit her like a slap, but she barely felt it. All she could see was the barn. Her father's barn, the barn he'd built with his own hands 30 years ago, going up in flames. Josiah was already there. He stood at the fence line, the twins strapped to his chest, helpless rage written across his face. When he saw Clara, he shouted something, but the roar of the fire swallowed his words. She ran to him. "The horses! I got them out!" He grabbed her arm. "Clara, stay back. The roof's about to go. My father built that barn, and he'd want you alive." The roof collapsed with a sound like thunder. Clara screamed as sparks exploded into the sky, showering down around them like falling stars. Josiah pulled her back, shielding her body with his own, the babies pressed between them. They stood there watching everything burn. When the flames finally died down, there was nothing left but blackened timbers and glowing embers. The snow around the barn had melted into muddy pools that reflected the dying firelight like pools of blood. Clara sank to her knees. "Who did this?" Josiah crouched beside her. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes hard. "You know who." She did. Of course she did. But knowing and proving were 2 different things. "Marcus," she whispered. "Or Edmund, or that detective." "Does it matter which one lit the match?" "It matters to me." Josiah helped her to her feet. The twins had started crying, frightened by the noise and the smoke. He rocked them gently, but his eyes never left Clara's face. "What do we do now?" Clara stared at the smoking ruins. Everything they'd documented. Every record, every ledger, every piece of proof that the ranch was thriving. Gone. "We rebuild," she said. "Clara, we rebuild." Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. "They want me to give up. They want me to surrender. But I won't. I won't give them the satisfaction." Josiah was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. Then we rebuild." They stood together in the darkness, ash falling around them like snow, and made a silent vow. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Morning came gray and cold. Clara hadn't slept. She'd spent the rest of the night walking the perimeter of the ranch, searching for any sign of who had set the fire. She found nothing. Whoever had done it knew what they were doing. Dot arrived just after sunrise. She took one look at the smoking barn and went pale. "Good Lord!" "They burned it," Clara said flatly. "All of it. The records, gone." Dot closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was steel in her gaze. "Then we make new ones, testimony, witnesses. People who've seen what you've done here. She gripped Clara's shoulders. This isn't over, child. Not while we're still standing. The hearing's in 6 days. I know. And the marshal? Due in Sheridan tomorrow. Dot paused. You should go. Both of you. Make your case before Haywood runs out of patience. Clara looked toward the bunkhouse where Josiah was feeding the twins. She thought about leaving him here unprotected with Edmund's men lurking in the shadows. I can't leave him. Then take him with you. And the baby's 60 miles in the cold with 2 infants. Better than staying here and waiting for them to try again. Dot's voice softened. Clara, listen to me. Whoever did this, they're not going to stop. They've shown you what they're willing to do. The only way to end this is to fight back. Legally. Loudly. In a way they can't ignore. Clara's hands clenched into fists. And if the marshal won't help, then we find another way. But we won't know until we try. Clara closed her eyes. She was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of losing. Tired of watching everything she loved turn to ash. But she'd made a promise. To her father. To herself. To the stubborn, broken man who'd stumbled onto her porch 3 weeks ago with 2 dying babies and nothing but hope. She opened her eyes. All right. We leave at noon. The ride to Sheridan was brutal. The roads were half-frozen, rutted from weeks of winter traffic. The wagon jolted and bounced over every stone, every patch of ice. Clara's arms ached from holding the reins, and her back screamed at her with every mile. But she kept going. Because stopping meant dying. Josiah sat beside her, the twins bundled in a nest of blankets at his feet. He hadn't spoken much since they'd left. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the horizon. You're quiet, Clara said, after the first hour. Thinking. About what? About what happens if this doesn't work. Clara tightened her grip on the reins. It'll work. You don't know that. I know we have to try. He was silent for a moment. Then, my whole life I've been running. Running from my past. Running from people who wanted to hurt me. Running from my own mistakes. I thought if I just kept moving, I could outrun everything. He paused. But you can't outrun the things that live inside you. Clara glanced at him. What do you mean? The guilt. The fear. The feeling that no matter what I do, it'll never be enough. He looked at her, his eyes raw. Hannah used to say I was too hard on myself, that I needed to forgive myself for things that weren't my fault. She was right. Maybe. But knowing something and believing it are different things. He looked down at the sleeping twins. I want to be better. For them. For you. For myself. But I don't know how. Clara reached over and took his hand. You start by showing up, she said. By staying instead of running. By fighting even when you're scared. She squeezed his fingers. You've already done all of that, Josiah. You just haven't noticed. He stared at their joined hands for a long moment. When he looked up, there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Hope. Real, genuine hope. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For believing in me. When I couldn't believe in myself. Clara felt her throat tighten. Someone had to. Why you? She thought about it. About her father's strength and her mother's kindness. About the ranch that had shaped her, the losses that had hardened her, the loneliness that had almost broken her. Because I know what it feels like to be alone, she said finally. And I didn't want you to feel that way anymore. They rode in silence after that, but the silence was different now. Warmer, closer, like 2 people who had finally stopped pretending they didn't need each other. Sheridan was bigger than Bitter Creek, but not by much. Clara found the marshal's office near the center of town, a squat wooden building with bars on the windows and a flag hanging limp in the still air. She left Josiah with the wagon and went inside. The marshal was a big man, broad-shouldered and gray-bearded, with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He listened to Clara's story without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied her. "Let me make sure I understand," he said slowly. "You're asking me to investigate a murder warrant from Kansas, question its validity, possibly block the extradition of a wanted man." "Yes." "Based on the word of a woman who's known him for 3 weeks." Clara felt her temper flare. "Based on the facts, Silas Crawford was a predator. He attacked a defenseless woman. Josiah stopped him. That's not murder, that's self-defense." "Maybe, but the warrant says otherwise." "The warrant was written by Crawford's brother, the sheriff of the county where it happened. There's no way that's impartial." The marshal stroked his beard. "You have any proof of that?" "I have testimony. From people who knew Hannah who saw what Crawford did to her, and I have Josiah's own account of what happened." "Testimony from people in Kansas." Clara hesitated. "From people here. Who can vouch for his character?" "Character witnesses don't overturn warrants, Miss Thornton." "Then what does—" The marshal was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "I've been a lawman for 30 years, he said. "I've seen good men hanged on bad evidence, and bad men walk free because they had money and connections. The law is supposed to be blind, but it's got more eyes than you'd think, and most of them are looking at whoever's holding the purse strings." He turned back to face her. "I can't overturn that warrant. Not without evidence. Real evidence. Documents, testimony from witnesses in Kansas, something that proves the original charge was false." Clara felt her heart sink. "I don't have that." "Then I can't help you." He paused. "But I can delay things. Buy you some time." "How?" "I'll send a telegram to the Kansas authorities. Request a formal review of the case. That'll take weeks, maybe months. In the meantime, that detective has no authority to take your man anywhere." Clara felt a surge of relief so strong it made her dizzy. "You'd do that. I'd do my job." The marshal's eyes hardened. "But understand this, Miss Thornton. If the review comes back and the warrant stands, there's nothing more I can do. He'll have to face trial in Kansas one way or another." "I understand. Do you? Because I've seen what happens to people who get their hopes up and then have them crushed." He stepped closer. "This buys you time. Nothing more. Use it wisely." Clara nodded. "I will." She walked out of the office and found Josiah waiting by the wagon, the twins awake and fussing in his arms. "Well," he asked, "we got time. Not much, but some. The marshal's requesting a formal review." Josiah's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank God." "Don't thank him yet. We still have to face the hearing about the ranch, and Marcus isn't going to stop just because one problem got delayed. No, but at least now we can focus on one battle at a time." Clara looked at him, at the man who'd become so much more than a stranger in such a short time. "Let's go home," she said. The word felt different now, fuller, like it meant something it hadn't before. They made it back to Bitter Creek by nightfall. The ranch looked different in the darkness, smaller somehow, more fragile. The charred remains of the barn stood like a skeleton against the moonlit sky, a reminder of everything they'd lost, but the house was still standing. The bunkhouse was intact, the animals were safe. It wasn't much, but it was something. Dot was waiting on the porch. "Well," she asked as Clara climbed down from the wagon, "the marshal's buying us time on the warrant, but the hearing for the ranch is still in 5 days." Dot nodded slowly. "Then we better get ready." "How they burned all our records." "Records can be recreated. I spent the last 2 days talking to everyone who's ever done business with the Thornton Ranch. Got signed statements from a dozen people saying they've bought cattle eggs grain from you over the years." She pulled a stack of papers from her coat. "It's not everything you lost, but it's a start." Clara took the papers with trembling hands. "Dot." "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You built something worth saving, Clara. I'm just helping you prove it." Josiah stepped up beside them, Samuel in one arm, Elijah in the other. "What about the fire?" he asked. "Can we prove who did it?" "Working on that." Dot's expression darkened. "I've got people asking questions. Someone saw riders heading away from your place that night. 3 of them. One of them was wearing a coat that looked mighty familiar." "Marcus." "Can't say for sure. But I've got a feeling we'll know more before the hearing." Clara looked at the papers in her hands, at the faces of her neighbors, who'd stood up for her when she'd thought she was alone. She felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen for a long, long time. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you." Dot put a hand on her shoulder. "We're not done yet, child. The hard part's still coming." "I know, but for the first time in a while I actually think we might win." Dot smiled. "That's the spirit. Now get inside and get some rest. You'll need your strength for what's ahead." Clara nodded and turned toward the house, but before she went inside, she stopped and looked back at Josiah. "You coming?" He looked surprised. "Inside your house." "Our house." The word slipped out before she could stop it. "If you want it to be." Josiah stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled a real smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. "Yeah," he said. "I want it to be." They walked inside together, the babies between them, the future uncertain but somehow less frightening than it had been before. The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, staring at the flames, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong. The judge could side with Marcus. The witnesses could change their stories. Some new disaster could strike before dawn. "You're thinking too loud again." She looked up. Josiah stood in the doorway, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "Can't help it," she said. He crossed the room and sat beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he finally said, "I want you to know something." "What?" "These past few weeks have been the happiest of my life, since Hannah." He paused. "I know that sounds strange given everything, the fire, the threats, the constant fear. But being here with you, it's felt like—" He searched for the words. "Like coming home. For the first time in years." Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes. "Josiah, I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty, or to put pressure on you. I just—" He turned to face her. "I need you to know that whatever happens, I don't regret any of it. Not one single moment." Clara reached up and touched his face. His skin was rough beneath her fingers, weathered by wind and work and worry. "I don't regret it either," she whispered. He leaned forward and kissed her. Softly at first, then deeper. His hands tangling in her hair. Clara melted into him, all her fears and doubts falling away, replaced by something warm and fierce and alive. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Stay with me tonight," she said. "Not like that. Just stay. I don't want to be alone." "You'll never be alone again," he promised. "Not if I have anything to say about it." They lay down together on the rug by the fire, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. The flames crackled and danced. Outside, the wind whispered secrets to the snow. And for the first time in 5 years, Clara May Thornton fell asleep, feeling safe. The courthouse was packed. Clara had never seen so many people crammed into one room. Every bench was full, every wall lined with bodies. The whole town had turned out to watch the show. She walked down the aisle with her head high, Josiah beside her, Dot following close behind. She could feel the eyes on her, hear the whispers rippling through the crowd. Let them look, let them talk. She'd stopped caring what they thought a long time ago. Marcus was already seated at the front, flanked by his lawyer and his father. Edmund sat rigid and composed, but Marcus couldn't hide the smug satisfaction on his face. "You ready?" Josiah murmured. "No, but let's do this anyway." The judge entered an elderly man named Wallace with a face like weathered stone. He took his seat, shuffled some papers, and called the room to order. "This hearing will determine the matter of Thornton Ranch," he announced. "Specifically whether the stewardship clause in the original deed applies to the current owner, Miss Clara May Thornton." He looked at Marcus. "Mr. Thornton, you may present your case." Marcus stood buttoning his coat with practiced ease. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. My great-grandfather wrote a clause into the original deed specifying that if the female inheritor failed to marry within a reasonable time, stewardship of the land would transfer to the nearest male relative." He gestured toward Clara. "Miss Thornton has been unmarried for 5 years. She's taken in a stranger, a man with no papers, no references, no proof of who he is. The ranch is failing. The barn burned down just days ago. Clearly she's incapable of managing the property alone." The crowd murmured. Marcus smiled. "I'm simply asking the court to honor the wishes of our ancestor. Transfer stewardship to me, and I'll ensure the Thornton legacy continues." Judge Wallace turned to Clara. "Miss Thornton, your response?" Clara stood. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Your Honor, that clause was written 50 years ago by a man who believed women couldn't own property. My father ignored it. The county ignored it, because it's outdated and unfair." She held up the stack of papers Dot had given her. "These are signed statements from a dozen people in this community, people who've done business with Thornton Ranch over the years, people who can testify that the ranch is productive, profitable, and well-managed." She stepped forward and placed the papers on the judge's desk. "As for the barn, yes, it burned. But not because of negligence, because someone set fire to it deliberately." She turned and looked directly at Marcus. "Someone who wanted to destroy my records. Someone who wanted me to fail." The crowd erupted. Judge Wallace banged his gavel. "Order, I will have order in this courtroom." Marcus shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. She's accusing me of arson without any proof." "I'm not accusing anyone," Clara said calmly. "I'm stating facts. The fire was set deliberately. The sheriff's investigating. And when he finds out who did it, I trust the court will take appropriate action." Judge Wallace studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to Marcus. "Mr. Thornton, do you have any evidence that Miss Thornton's ranch is failing? Beyond the fire, which is apparently under investigation." Marcus sputtered. "Well, no, but do you have any evidence that she's been negligent in her duties as owner? The man she's taken in is not on trial here." The judge's voice hardened. "Unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, Mr. Thornton, I suggest you sit down." Marcus sat. Judge Wallace turned back to Clara. "Miss Thornton, these documents are compelling, but I have one question." "Yes, Your Honor." "The clause specifically mentions marriage. Are you currently married or engaged?" Clara felt her heart stop. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading, the one question she couldn't answer without either lying or destroying everything. She opened her mouth to speak, and Josiah stood up. "She's spoken, for Your Honor." Every head in the courtroom turned. Josiah walked forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He stopped beside Clara and took her hand. "My name is Josiah Beckett. I came to this ranch 3 weeks ago with nothing but 2 hungry babies and a prayer. Clara Thornton took us in, fed us, gave us shelter, gave us a home." He looked at Clara, his eyes soft. "I've loved 2 women in my life. The first one died because I couldn't protect her. I won't make that mistake again." He turned back to the judge. "I'm asking Clara to marry me, right here, right now, if she'll have me." The courtroom went dead silent. Clara stared at him, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. "Josiah, I know this isn't how it's supposed to be done," he said quietly. "I know I should have asked you properly with a ring and flowers and pretty words. But I'm not a man of pretty words, Clara. I'm just a man who loves you, who wants to spend whatever time I've got left standing beside you." He squeezed her hand. "So what do you say?" Will you marry me? Clara looked at his face, at the hope and fear and love written there so plainly, at the man who'd stumbled into her life and somehow become the center of it. She thought about her father, about her mother, about the promise she'd made to hold this land until her last breath, and she realized something. The land wasn't the promise, the people were. Yes, she said. The courtroom erupted. Judge Wallace banged his gavel, but he was smiling. Well, he said when the noise died down, I believe that settles the matter of the stewardship clause. He turned to Marcus. Unless you have any objections, Mr. Thornton. Marcus's face was purple with rage, but with the whole town watching, there was nothing he could do. No objections, he spat. Then this hearing is adjourned. Miss Thornton retains full ownership of Thornton Ranch. The judge stood. And someone find a preacher. I believe we have a wedding to perform. The crowd cheered, and Clara May Thornton kissed the man she loved in front of God and everyone. The wedding was simple. Reverend Miller performed the ceremony right there in the courthouse with half the town as witnesses. Clara wore her mother's old dress hastily retrieved from a trunk in the attic. Josiah wore the same clothes he'd been wearing all week, cleaned and pressed by Dot's determined hands. None of it mattered. What mattered was the way Josiah looked at her when he said, I do. What mattered was the warmth of his hand in hers, the steadiness of his voice, the tears he didn't try to hide. What mattered was that for the first time in 5 years, Clara didn't feel alone. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Miller said. You may kiss your bride. Josiah cupped her face in his rough hands and kissed her softly. The crowd cheered. Somewhere in the back, Dot was crying. When they finally pulled apart, Clara saw Marcus pushing through the crowd toward the door. His father followed face like stone. Neither of them looked back. We won, Clara whispered. We did. So why do I feel like this isn't over? Josiah's expression darkened. Because it isn't. Not yet. He was right. They'd won the battle for the ranch. But Victor Haywood was still out there. The warrant from Kansas was still hanging over their heads, and men like Marcus and Edmund didn't accept defeat gracefully. The war was just beginning. The first attack came 3 nights later. Clara was asleep when she heard the horses. Dozens of them thundering across the frozen ground like an approaching storm. She grabbed her rifle and ran to the window. Riders. At least 20 of them. They wore bandanas over their faces and carried torches that blazed against the darkness. Josiah. He was already awake, pulling on his boots, his face grim. Get the babies, he said. Take them to the root cellar. Don't come out until I say so. I'm not hiding while you... Clara. He grabbed her shoulders. Please, I can't fight them and protect you at the same time. I need to know you're safe. She wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him and fight. But she looked at Samuel and Elijah sleeping peacefully in their cradle, and she knew he was right. Be careful, she whispered. Always. She gathered the twins and ran. The root cellar was cold and dark, smelling of earth and old potatoes. Clara crouched in the corner, the babies pressed against her chest, her rifle across her knees. Above her she could hear shouting, gunshots, the sound of breaking glass. She closed her eyes and prayed. Minutes passed. Hours. She lost track of time. All she knew was the darkness and the cold and the terrible sounds of battle filtering down through the floorboards. Then silence. Clara held her breath. Footsteps above her, heavy, slow, coming closer. The cellar door creaked open. Clara! Josiah's voice. Clara nearly collapsed with relief. I'm here. He climbed down and gathered her in his arms. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his clothes torn and singed, but he was alive. It's over, he said. They're gone. Who were they? Hired men. Crawford's people, I think. Haywood must have sent word back to Kansas. He pulled back and looked at her. They came to take me. I wouldn't let them. Are you hurt? Nothing serious. A few cuts, a few bruises. He smiled grimly. You should see the other guys. How many? 23. I counted. Clara stared at him. You fought off 23 men. I had help. What help? As if in answer, she heard voices above. Familiar voices. She climbed out of the cellar and found her kitchen full of people. Sheriff Dodd was there, his arm in a sling. Dot stood by the stove loading a rifle like she'd been doing it all her life. Tom Briggs, the man who'd helped build the barn, was bandaging a wound on his leg. A dozen others milled about, checking weapons, tending injuries, talking in low voices. What? Clara couldn't find the words. Dot looked up and smiled. You didn't think we'd let you face them alone, did you? But how did you know? I've got eyes all over this county. The moment those riders crossed the county line, I knew about it. She set down the rifle and crossed to Clara. You're one of us, child. We protect our own. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She'd spent so long believing she was alone that no one cared that she had to fight every battle by herself. She'd been wrong. Thank you, she whispered. All of you. Tom Briggs tipped his hat. Your father was a good man, Miss Clara. Would have done the same for any of us. It's Mrs. Beckett now, Dot corrected with a smile. And yes, he would have. Clara looked around at the faces of her neighbors, her community, her family. People who'd come in the middle of the night to stand between her and danger. This was what home meant. Not just land and buildings. People. Connections. Love. What now? She asked. Sheriff Dodd stepped forward. Now we wait. Those men will report back to whoever sent them. And when they do, we'll be ready. Ready for what? For whatever comes next. What came next was Victor Haywood. He rode up to the ranch the following morning alone, his black coat pristine despite the mud and snow. Clara met him on the porch, Josiah beside her, the sheriff at their backs. Mr. Haywood, she said, come to try again. Haywood dismounted slowly. He looked tired, older than he had before. I came to talk, he said, if you'll let me. Talk fast. He took off his hat and held it in his hands. I sent those men. You know that. What you don't know is why. Money. Same reason as everything. Partly. He paused. But also because I thought I was doing the right thing. Crawford's family paid me to find a murderer. I believed them. Josiah stepped forward. And now, Haywood met his eyes. Now I've seen what kind of man you are. Watched you fight for your family. Watched you risk everything to protect people you love. He shook his head slowly. That's not the behavior of a murderer. So what are you saying? I'm saying I made a mistake. Haywood reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. This is the warrant, the only copy west of the Mississippi. He handed it to Josiah. What do you want me to do with it? Whatever you want. Burn it, keep it, frame it on your wall. Haywood's mouth twisted. I'm done hunting innocent men for guilty money. Crawford's family can find someone else to do their dirty work. Clara stepped forward. Why the change of heart? Haywood looked at her for a long moment. I had a wife once, and a daughter. Lost them both to yellow fever 10 years ago. I've spent every day since then running from that pain, burying it under work and whiskey, and pretending I didn't care about anything anymore. He glanced at the twins visible through the window, sleeping peacefully in their cradle. But watching you two, seeing what you'd sacrificed to keep your family together, it reminded me of what I used to have, what I lost. He put his hat back on. I'm tired of being the villain in someone else's story. Time I started writing my own. He mounted his horse. Good luck, Mr. Beckett, Mrs. Beckett. He tipped his hat. You're going to need it. He rode off without looking back. Clara turned to Josiah, who was staring at the warrant in his hands like it was made of gold. Is it really over? She asked. The warrant is, but Crawford's family won't give up that easily. Then we'll face them, together. He looked at her, his eyes soft. Together. They burned the warrant that night. Clara built the fire high, and Josiah fed the document to the flames piece by piece. They watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash, taking with it 3 months of fear and running and desperation. "How does it feel?" Clara asked. "Like breathing for the first time in years." She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now?" He kissed the top of her head. "Now we live." The weeks that followed were hard, but they were good. Josiah threw himself into rebuilding the barn. The whole town helped, showing up with lumber and nails and strong backs, refusing payment, refusing even thanks. Within a month, a new structure stood where the old one had burned bigger and stronger than before. Clara documented everything this time. Every cow, every chicken, every fence post. She kept duplicate records in 3 different places and sent copies to Dot for safekeeping. She would never be caught unprepared again. Marcus and Edmund stayed quiet. The sheriff had made it clear that any further interference would result in charges, and even their money couldn't buy their way out of attempted murder in front of half the county. But Clara knew they were still out there. Watching. Waiting. Planning. Let them wait. She was ready. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. The creek behind the ranch began to run again, its icy waters carrying the last of winter away. The twins grew bigger, stronger, more curious about the world around them. Clara taught them to crawl on the kitchen floor, while Josiah watched from the doorway, his face full of wonder. "They're going to be runners," she said. "I can already tell." "Gets that from their mother." Clara looked up surprised. "Hannah." Josiah nodded, his expression soft. "She was always moving, couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. He paused. "She would have liked you." "You think so?" "I know so. You're the kind of woman she admired, strong, stubborn, unwilling to take no for an answer." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I wish I could have met her." "Me too." Josiah crossed the room and sat beside her. "But I think in a way you have. Every time I look at Sam and Eli, I see her. Her eyes, her smile, her spirit." He took Clara's hand. "And every time I look at you, I see the future she wanted for them. A home, a family, a life." Clara squeezed his fingers. "We'll give them that, all of it." "I know we will." The final confrontation came on a Sunday morning. Clara was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard the horses. She looked out the window and felt her blood run cold. Edmund Thornton sat astride a black stallion at the edge of her property. Beside him rode Marcus and 6 other men, all of them armed. Josiah appeared at her shoulder. "Stay inside." "Like hell." "Clara, this is my land, my home. I'm not hiding from anyone." She grabbed her rifle and walked out onto the porch. Edmund dismounted slowly, his movements stiff with age. He walked toward the house until he stood at the foot of the porch steps, looking up at Clara with those cold, calculating eyes. "Mrs. Beckett," he said, "I believe we have unfinished business." "We don't have any business. You lost. The court ruled. It's over." "Courts can be overturned. Rulings can be challenged." Edmund smiled thinly. "I've spent 50 years building power in this territory. You think one hearing is going to stop me?" Josiah stepped forward. "You need to leave. Now." "Or what, you'll shoot me?" Edmund laughed. "Go ahead. It'll just prove what I've been saying all along, that you're a murderer who doesn't belong here." "I'm not a murderer." "The warrant says otherwise." "The warrant's been destroyed." Edmund's smile flickered. "What?" "Victor Haywood gave it to us. Burned it myself." Josiah's voice was steady. "You've got nothing, Mr. Thornton. No leverage, no legal standing. Nothing but spite and stubbornness." Edmund's face darkened. You think that matters? I don't need warrants. I don't need courts. I can make your lives hell with nothing but a word in the right ear." "Then say your word." Clara stepped to the edge of the porch, her rifle raised. "But know this, every time you come at us, we'll fight back. Every time you try to take what's ours, we'll be standing right here ready to defend it." She looked past Edmund to the men behind him. "And it won't just be us. This whole community has our back. Every farmer, every rancher, every shopkeeper in Bitter Creek. You want a war, you'll get one. But you won't win." Edmund stared at her for a long moment. Behind him, his men shifted uncomfortably. Marcus looked like he wanted to speak, but his father's raised hand silenced him. "You're making a mistake," Edmund said finally. "No, I'm making a stand." The silence stretched. The wind picked up, stirring the dust around Edmund's boots. Then slowly, Edmund turned and walked back to his horse. "This isn't over," he said as he mounted. "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." Edmund rode away without another word. Marcus followed, glancing back once with something that might have been fear in his eyes. Clara watched them until they disappeared over the ridge. Then she lowered her rifle and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You okay?" Josiah asked. "Better than okay. Think they'll be back?" Clara considered the question. Edmund Thornton was a proud man, a powerful man. He didn't accept defeat easily, but he was also old, tired, fighting a battle that had already been lost. "Maybe," she said, "but if they come, we'll be ready. We always are." The summer that followed was the best of Clara's life. She and Josiah worked the ranch together side by side, building something that was more than either of them could have created alone. The cattle thrived. The crops grew tall. The new barn filled with hay and horses and the sound of children's laughter. Sam and Eli took their first steps in August, tottering across the kitchen floor with their arms outstretched, their faces bright with wonder. Clara caught them when they fell. Josiah lifted them up when they succeeded. They were a family, a real family, forged not by blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by the decision to stand together when the world tried to tear them apart. Dot visited every Sunday bringing pies and gossip and unsolicited advice. Sheriff Dodd stopped by once a week to check on things, though Clara suspected he just liked her coffee. The neighbors who'd helped rebuild the barn became regular fixtures at the Beckett table, sharing meals and stories and the kind of quiet companionship that made a house feel like a home. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Clara and Josiah sat on the porch watching the twins play in the yard. The air smelled of honeysuckle and fresh-cut hay. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "I've been thinking," Josiah said. "About what?" "About Hannah. About what she would say if she could see us now." Clara reached over and took his hand. "What do you think she'd say?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "She'd say we did good. She'd say the boys are beautiful and the ranch is thriving and we built something worth being proud of." He paused. "And then she'd probably tell me to stop moping and get back to work." Clara laughed. "I like her already." "You would have." He squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Clara." "For what?" "For everything. For taking us in. For fighting for us. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." His voice thickened. "For giving me a reason to stay." Clara leaned over and kissed his cheek. "You gave me a reason too," she said. "I spent 5 years alone telling myself I didn't need anyone. Telling myself that strength meant standing on your own." She shook her head. "I was wrong. Strength isn't about being alone. It's about knowing when to let people in." Josiah pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love you too." They sat there as the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. The twins fell asleep in the grass, and Josiah carried them inside, while Clara watched from the porch. This was her life now. This man. These children. This land. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was hers. Years later, someone from town asked Clara why she'd fought so hard for the ranch. "You could have sold," they said. "Moved somewhere easier. Started fresh." Clara just smiled. "Because home isn't a place you buy," she said. "It's a place you bleed for. It's the ground you defend, and the people you love, and the life you build with your own two hands." She looked out at the fields, at the barn, at the house where her husband and sons were waiting. "My father taught me that, and I taught my boys, and someday they'll teach their children. What will they teach them?" Clara thought about it, about the snow and the fire and the battles she'd won, about the stranger who'd knocked on her door one desperate night and changed everything. They'll teach them that the only past that matters is the one you choose to build from. That family isn't about blood. That love isn't about circumstances. And that sometimes the best things in life come from the darkest moments. She turned back to the person and smiled. They'll teach them to fight, to hope, to never give up. And if they fall? Clara's smile widened. Then they'll teach them to get back up. Because that's what Beckett's do. She walked back to the house where Josiah stood in the doorway, Samuel on his hip, Elijah at his feet. He reached out his hand, and she took it. Behind them, the sun set over Thornton Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ahead of them, the future waited, and Clara May Beckett walked toward it without fear, because she had finally learned the truth that had eluded her for so long, that the strongest walls aren't built from stone or wood, but from the people who stand beside you when the storms come. And she was never standing alone again.